Ethan's flight had landed hours later than planned, and the only sound greeting him at home was the quiet hum of the refrigerator. He set his suitcase down in the hallway, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. As he made his way into the living room, the faint glow of a lamp illuminated an odd scene. 2 half-empty wine glasses sat on the coffee table, their stems slightly smudged with fingerprints. The scent of cologne lingered in the air. Not his, but sharp and unfamiliar. His brow furrowed as his mind raced. Natalie, his wife of 6 years, was always meticulous about appearances. She would never leave a mess like this behind, especially knowing he was returning tonight. Something was off. As he turned to head upstairs, muffled voices caught his attention. Following the sound, he paused just outside the bedroom, his heart pounding. Natalie was on the phone, her tone hushed but resolute. "Mom, calm down. Everything is under control. Ryan left hours ago. Ethan won't suspect a thing," she said, her voice dripping with confidence. Ethan's stomach churned. He leaned against the wall, the words sinking in like daggers. His wife wasn't just hiding something. She was orchestrating it. Ethan remained frozen by the bedroom door, his mind racing to process what he had just overheard. The name Ryan stuck out, but the implications of Natalie's conversation with her mother unraveled something deeper. It wasn't just about her. It was about Victoria as well. Whatever was happening, Ethan realized it was a family affair, both figuratively and literally. Taking a deep breath, he straightened and entered the room, pretending he hadn't heard anything. Natalie sat cross-legged on the bed, her phone casually tossed beside her. Her face lit up with a practiced smile, warm and inviting, as if nothing were amiss. "Hey, babe," she said, her voice a perfect balance of surprise and affection. "I didn't expect you this late. How was the trip?" Ethan studied her, taking in the slightly disheveled hair and the faint traces of nervous energy she masked well. "It was fine. Exhausting, but I'm glad to be home." He leaned in for a kiss, his lips brushing against hers lightly. Her response felt just a fraction off, hesitant, like she was measuring her reactions. "Did you eat? I can heat something up for you," Natalie offered, standing abruptly, her movements a bit too eager. "No need," Ethan replied, watching her closely. "I'll just grab some water." As she headed downstairs, Ethan took the opportunity to glance around. The subtle signs were everywhere, now that he was looking for them. A crumpled blanket at the foot of the bed, faintly wrinkled sheets on one side. It wasn't conclusive evidence, but it painted a picture that didn't sit well. In the kitchen, Natalie busied herself rinsing the wine glasses, humming a tune as if to appear carefree. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "Late-night wine?" he asked casually. Natalie flinched slightly before turning to face him. "Oh, yeah, I had a glass with Mom earlier. She stopped by to chat for a bit." Her explanation was smooth, but Ethan caught the faint waver in her voice. "That's nice. What did you two talk about?" Natalie smiled, tilting her head as if recalling a pleasant memory. "Oh, just catching up, you know. She's been feeling a little stressed lately with Dad's work schedule and all." "Right," Ethan said, his tone neutral. He walked over to the sink, standing close enough to see her stiffen ever so slightly. "Funny thing, I thought I smelled cologne earlier. Doesn't sound like something your mum would wear." Natalie laughed a little too brightly. "Oh, that must have been from the dry cleaner's bag she brought over. You know how they use those scents sometimes?" Ethan nodded slowly, letting her believe she had smoothed things over. But his mind was already calculating his next move. He wasn't one to act rashly. No, he needed clarity and certainty. As they settled into bed that night, Natalie fell asleep quickly, her breathing soft and steady. Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. If she thought she had convinced him, she was mistaken. The game had just begun, and Ethan was prepared to play it better than she ever could. Ethan woke early the next morning, the house still cloaked in the quiet of dawn. Natalie stirred beside him, but didn't wake as he slipped out of bed. Today he would begin uncovering the truth, piece by calculated piece. His first stop was the living room where the wine glasses had been the night before. Natalie had rinsed them, but Ethan noticed one was still damp, forgotten in the rush. He picked it up, inspecting the faint lip print on the rim. It wasn't Natalie's shade of lipstick. It was slightly darker. His jaw tightened. He then turned his attention to the faint cologne that had lingered last night. The scent had faded, but the trace was distinct. Moving to the couch, Ethan lifted a cushion. Tucked beneath it was a business card with the name Ryan Peterson embossed in bold letters. A phone number and a company logo sat below it. His fingers tightened around the card as the name from Natalie's conversation echoed in his mind. Ethan's stomach churned, but he forced himself to remain calm. His training in business negotiations had taught him the value of composure. He wouldn't confront Natalie with half-truths or suspicions. He needed to be sure. Deciding to investigate further, Ethan checked the trash bin in the kitchen. Beneath a layer of innocuous scraps, he found a crumpled receipt. The items listed were for an upscale restaurant he'd never been to, with Natalie. The date and time coincided with one of the evenings he'd been away. The evidence was piling up, but it was still circumstantial. Ethan needed confirmation. Something undeniable. He retreated to his office, pulling out the security camera feed from the smart doorbell. While it didn't cover the entire house, it did record who came and went. Fast-forwarding through the footage, Ethan's pulse quickened when he spotted Natalie opening the door 2 nights prior. She was dressed in a sleek, low-cut dress he hadn't seen before. Moments later, a man appeared, tall, confident, and with an air of familiarity about him. Ryan Peterson. The video showed them entering the house together, Natalie glancing over her shoulder before shutting the door. Ethan's jaw clenched. There it was, the truth he had feared but needed to see with his own eyes. But one thing still nagged at him, Natalie's conversation with her mother. What role did Victoria play in this? Returning to the business card, he dialed the number listed, masking his caller ID. A man's voice answered, smooth and self-assured. Ryan Peterson speaking. Ethan remained silent, studying the voice. He hung up after a few seconds, but the brief exchange confirmed it. This was the man who had been in his home with his wife. Now he understood the scope of the betrayal, and the fact that Natalie and Victoria were in this together made it even more damning. Ethan smiled coldly. They thought they were clever, but they had underestimated him. It was time to make his move. Ethan spent the next few days crafting his plan with meticulous precision. He knew Natalie and Victoria would continue to underestimate him, and he intended to use that to his advantage. Each interaction with his wife became an exercise in restraint. While Natalie acted as if everything were normal, Ethan played along, carefully observing her every move. One evening, as Natalie stepped out for what she claimed was a yoga class, Ethan decided it was time to dig deeper into her world. He accessed their shared phone plan, a detail she had likely forgotten. Her recent calls and text logs painted a clear picture. Frequent communications with her mother and several exchanges with Ryan. Many messages were deleted, but some remained, revealing casual flirtations and plans to meet. Next, Ethan shifted his focus to Victoria. He arranged to visit his mother-in-law under the guise of helping her with a household issue. Victoria greeted him with her usual charm, but Ethan noted the slight tension in her demeanor. She offered him coffee, chatting casually about her husband's upcoming work trip and her plans to keep busy in his absence. As she spoke, Ethan's eyes scanned the room. He noticed a silk scarf draped over the back of a chair, its perfume faintly resembling the cologne he had smelt in his own home. Nearby, an open planner lay on the counter. While Victoria stepped away to retrieve something, Ethan casually glanced at it. One entry caught his attention. Lunch with The puzzle pieces were aligning. Ryan wasn't just involved with Natalie. He was connected to Victoria as well. Ethan's suspicions deepened, but he remained outwardly friendly, even offering to help her fix a squeaky door before he left. Back home, Ethan continued his preparations. He backed up the security footage from the doorbell camera and documented the receipts, messages, and any other incriminating evidence he had collected. He created a private email account, sending copies of everything to himself for safekeeping. His plan was not just to expose Natalie's betrayal, but to unravel the web of lies she and her mother had woven. Ethan began reaching out to his father-in-law, Victor, under the pretense of discussing family matters. Their conversations were casual at first, but Ethan subtly steered them toward Victoria's unusual behavior. "I noticed Victoria has been taking a lot of trips into the city lately," Ethan mentioned during one call. "She seems busy. Everything okay between you two?" Victor hesitated before responding, his tone uncertain. "She says it's just errands, but now that you mention it, she has been acting different." Ethan planted the seed of doubt, knowing it would grow. He didn't push too hard. Victor needed to come to the truth on his own. Meanwhile, Ethan made sure to keep Natalie close, suggesting date nights and weekend plans. She seemed relieved by his apparent ignorance, falling back into her routine without suspicion. But Ethan wasn't done yet. The storm was gathering, and Ethan ensured he would be the one to control its direction. The day Ethan had been meticulously planning finally arrived. He waited until Victor was out of town for work, leaving Victoria vulnerable. Ethan had gathered enough evidence to dismantle both Natalie's web of lies and her mother's duplicity. Now, it was time to act. Ethan began with a carefully crafted email to Victor, attaching the security footage, receipts, and records of Victoria's lunch meetings with Ryan. The email's subject line read, "You deserve the truth." In the message, Ethan detailed everything he had discovered, Victoria's affair and her manipulation of Natalie to cover it up. He wrote with precision, leaving no room for misinterpretation, and ended the email with a single line, "You deserve better than this." Next, Ethan confronted Natalie. Waiting until she returned home from one of her so-called yoga classes, he sat in the living room with his laptop open, the damning evidence displayed on the screen. "Sit down," he said calmly, his tone devoid of emotion. Natalie froze, her keys dangling from her hand. "What's going on?" Ethan's expression was cold and unyielding. "You tell me. Maybe you can explain why Ryan was in my house while I was away, or why you've been helping your mother hide her own affair." Her face drained of color as she stammered, "Ethan, it's not what you think." "Don't insult me by lying again," he cut her off, his voice sharp. "I've seen the messages, the footage, the receipts. I know everything." Natalie's composure crumbled as tears welled in her eyes. "Ethan, I was trying to protect Mum. She begged me to help her, and I didn't know how to say no. Please, you have to understand." "What I understand," Ethan interrupted, "is that you didn't hesitate to betray me in the process. You chose deceit over honesty, manipulation over trust." Natalie reached out to him, but he stepped back, his gaze unyielding. "We're done, Natalie. You and your mother made your choices. Now you'll face the consequences." Ethan left the room, her sobs echoing behind him. He felt no sympathy. The final act of his plan came the next morning when he sent an anonymous tip to Ryan's employer, attaching evidence of his unethical behavior. Ryan, whose arrogance had blinded him, soon found himself jobless and publicly disgraced. Victor's response came later that day. A single text from him confirmed the fallout. "Thank you for telling me. I'll handle the rest." Ethan packed his belongings that evening, leaving behind the home he had once cherished. As he closed the door behind him, he felt a profound sense of release. Natalie and Victoria were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Driving away, Ethan reflected on the ordeal. He had loved Natalie once, but her betrayal had killed that love. What remained was a man who had taken control of his destiny, ensuring justice was served. As the city skyline faded in his rearview mirror, Ethan felt a quiet sense of triumph. The past was behind him, and the future was his to shape.